Now that's a lot of languages. Am I flexing? Yeah. Siana chicos, here are 5 easy ways to instantly boost your comprehension in a foreign language so that you can start learning that language through genuine, enjoyable content today. None of these tips is at all difficult and none of them involves actual learning. That is, the tips are not just get better at the language. All of these tips, if done correctly, are just shortcuts to better comprehension, which will in turn make you better at the language, which is what you want in the end. That's your goal. Yes? Right. So to be better at the language, I want you to imagine, and come with me on this one, okay? It'll be fun, I promise. Imagine that you're walking through a giant, super long airport, right? It's like 50 miles long. And that journey through the airport, that is your journey of learning this language. And the further you go through the airport, the easier it is to get through the next bit, to get to the next stage, because language learning is easier when you already know some of that language. I hope you're with me so far, because we haven't gone very far. And now imagine that you were not aware somehow that there were actually travelators going a good 5 miles an hour, like going a good speed compared to your walking speed. And they go a long distance. They go well past where you can see in the airport. You would want to jump on those travelators, right? Well, these 5 things, these are your travelators. They don't mean that you don't have to go through the airport. You don't just skip the entire process. You still have to do work to learn the language, but they make it easier to get to a point further into the airport because when you get further in, it becomes easier to go even further. So starting with number 1, because that's how numbers work, watch with subtitles. And this is so obvious, I already knew that. Just calm it. We're gonna spend some time on this because we're not just talking about subtitles here. Within this question is the key, is the hidden key. It takes some time to answer, but once you know the answer, you'll be very clear about everything else you're trying to do. I get this question a lot. Should you watch with subtitles in your language, let's assume for ease's sake that it's English, or your target language, let's take for example Polish? Well, it depends on your level. Keep in mind what it is you're trying to achieve. You're trying to use content in the language as a vehicle to build your comprehension of that language. The content contains language within it, and by consuming that content, you consume the language and you absorb it. Easy, right? Well, no, because let's imagine someone on day 1 of learning Polish. They don't even know the word for hello, but they've found my channel. Lucky them. And even luckier them, they've become Tim Tam Cartel by joining YouTube channel members to get the extended versions of these videos, early releases, bonus tips, even bonus videos occasionally. For example, later on in this video, they're going to get a tip on how to get tons of audiobooks in their target language because they're Tim Tam Cartel members. Are you? No? That's okay. Become one. Oh, no. Point it up. It's down. It's down. Join. It says join. That's all it says. It's not there. Nothing's there. Look away now. And even though they're a beginner, they know that they should use content in the language to build up their comprehension in that language. So they find a complex political thriller in Polish and they start watching Polish audio, Polish subtitles. Can you see the problem? That show, that content, whatever it is, which may have the entire Polish language contained within its 8 seasons for all I care, that show is not content to someone who cannot understand it. While yes, in theory, if you do that for long enough, you will learn to understand Polish, it will take thousands of hours and you'll probably give up. And even if you get there in the end, your understanding of Polish will not be better just because you didn't use subtitles. In fact, because we're not children, we come at this with biases about how languages should work, and they may be ingrained before we have a chance to fix them and be harder to fix later. Instead, the complete beginner should use English subtitles, but do their best to stay tuned to the audio as much as possible. Now, obviously, they should actually learn some words and phrases first. I'm not suggesting that they just go in cold turkey without knowing any words or phrases and just start watching stuff with English subtitles. But if they still don't understand enough that the content stays functional as content, then they definitely should use English subtitles and try to stay tuned to the audio. That's going to be much better than just going in hardcore Polish subs, Polish audio, everything. But if you're not a beginner, let's say you can understand about 90% of the words that you read, which by the way isn't quite as much as it sounds. Missing 10% is still quite significant. But let's say you can understand 90% of the words you read, but you can only understand between 20 and 60% of what you hear, then you should use Polish subtitles. Hopefully you can see how what you're doing at the 2 different levels is essentially the same. You're using the content as a vehicle to improve your comprehension of that language. It's just that at the beginner stage, you need something, some kind of aid like English subtitles, to make sure that the content stays functional as content for you. And at a certain level, you become able to do that with target language subtitles, except that you're now learning the language more effectively because you've got more headspace in the language. So you're just learning it more effectively because there's more of it, basically. As a beginner, you're just not meeting that threshold. You can't use all content to improve your skills in the language because you don't understand enough of it for it to even function as content. That is Travelator number 1. Use the subtitles in the language that are appropriate for your level. Number 2 is to watch, read, and listen to things that you've already consumed before in your native language. That is, stories that you already know. Anyone who hasn't done this is going to be blown away when they discover how much of an advantage this is. Let's take audiobooks as an example, because audiobooks are my favorite form of thing, like they're just my favorite entity in general. On screen is a list of languages that I can listen to audiobooks in. I can already hear someone raging in the comments about their bloody sick of YouTubers clickbaiting saying they speak 1800 languages and it's all garbage and bring back Johnny Carson and he's gonna tell you where to stick your mandatory face mask. So I know you're busy typing, but listen, smooth brain. Except for English, Swedish, and some Spanish, this is not a list of the languages that I speak or even properly understand. But if I were to take a book that I'd already read and could remember the story of, and then have the audiobook play in any of these languages, I'd be sort of able to follow along more or less well depending on which language. If we're talking Norwegian, very well. If we're talking Portuguese, probably less well. But all of them, from even up at like English and Swedish all the way down to Portuguese, would get easier if I were to also have the book, printed book or ebook to follow along with. Now that is a lot of languages. So am I flexing? No, I don't speak these languages. It's just that following along with a story that you've already read, that you already know, particularly if you know it very well, is just not as hard as you think. If you add to that learning not that many words, like say 200 or 500 or even 1,000 words, and a commitment to actually learn the language, this becomes much easier than you would think and much more beneficial than you would think. Remember that although the content is the vehicle that increases your comprehension of the language, ordinarily you would need some understanding of the language first before you could understand the content. But in this case, that first step has been done for you because you already know the story and your brain is very good at latching onto story. So even if you can just pick out a couple of words here and there, maybe because they're familiar from a language you already know, or because you've learnt them, then you can kind of follow along. And this is very beneficial because the entire time that you're doing that, the language is going into your ears and being processed by your brain, trying to sort out what means what words do this. If you do that for long enough, especially if you do it over all three mediums like visual, audio, and literature, then you will develop a very robust comprehension of the language. Number 3 is very quick. We don't need to spend forever on it because it's sort of an extension of number 2, but 5 things sounds better than 4. I've given you some bonus stuff, okay? Stop complaining. So trick number 3 is if you must consume something that you haven't consumed before, you don't know anything about it, find out something about it. Don't go in cold. If you're a complete beginner, read a plot synopsis with full spoilers. If you're not quite a complete beginner, read a shorter plot synopsis. These kinds of plot synopses are like everywhere these days. Look on IMDb, watch a recap on YouTube, whatever. You don't need to go into everything completely fresh. With shows that are complex and properly meant for adults, I only go in completely cold if it's in Swedish. Any other language, and I will check something first or use English subtitles, whatever I need to do. Don't let your pride tell you that you need to go full screen lock, no synopsis, no subtitles, nothing. Think about it. You do not get more language benefit out of watching something where you don't know what's going on. If you're using content to advance your comprehension of a language, you need to first be able to follow that content. So if you're a beginner or even in some cases intermediate and you're watching, reading, or listening to something new, find out what's going on beforehand. For number 4, we're going to switch it up a little bit because you can consume things that only have a limited number of outcomes. This time, the language doesn't have to be easy, you don't need to use subtitles, the settings and the cast and the characters can be anything you like, and you don't have to have consumed it before, but what you do want is for everything to be moving at a good pace towards a pretty set conclusion. This trick works for anything, but it works particularly well for books and audiobooks because when you don't have the visuals, it's a little bit easier to get bored, and books do tend to be on the longer side. Like a short audiobook is like 8 hours, but that's going to be a whole season of a lot of shows. But for shows, look for stuff where each episode is like a single case that's solved at the end of the episode. Because you know the premise and you know where it's going, which is that they solve the case. But for you, everything in between that just becomes the language. Now, in English, I don't much like these shows because I don't see the point. They're like a 5-piece jigsaw puzzle to me. But now switch that to a target language, and suddenly it becomes like a 100-piece jigsaw puzzle. It's still not impossible. I can still do it and it doesn't crush my spirit or take all day, but I still have to engage with the language if I want to have any chance of figuring out what's going on. And it sort of becomes like a puzzle within a puzzle, because the puzzle on screen of who did the thing or whatever is reasonably easy. But I have that extra layer. This really forces you to engage with the language in what I think is quite a fun way. Number 5 is going to sound like I'm repeating myself, but I'm not. You should consume things over and over again. Hey, but isn't that the same as consuming things that you've already consumed in English? No. It's not. At first, yes, because the first goal is to understand the content well enough that it advances your comprehension of the language. I may have mentioned that, but let's assume you watch a DreamWorks animated movie that you've seen before in English, and so you're watching in Dutch or Vietnamese. You now understand the content. There may be lines here and there that you don't understand, and you don't remember what those were from when you watched it in English, but it's not like you need to know the story better. You know the story already, and you're continuing to watch this again and again, so it's not like you're forgetting the story anytime soon, right? So why would you keep watching it? Well, that's a very long answer that I have an entire video about coming in June, but the short version of the answer is, if you're watching How to Train Your Dragon in, let's say, Thai, you'll hear the word for dragon probably 50 times over 2 viewings. And then there's all the super common stuff like it, was, he, she, there is, I go, I went. You'll hear those so often that eventually you'll actually start ignoring them because you know the story and you understand the story, and the story has nothing new to you in it, and you also know the basic language things and how they're being used in each scene. You're then essentially forced to start picking up on things and hearing things in new language that you didn't even realize was there, and better than that, you'll start hearing them so clearly that you can't believe you ever didn't hear them. How far can you take this repeated viewing? Well, I'm not actually sure, but let me put it this way. I've now been doing this with 2 very well animated, very detailed, just very good films, and I've watched one of them 40 times. And that film has not yet dried out in terms of the language that I still notice and pick up, and the details of the film that I'm still picking up. I know this one sounds a bit crazy, but it is a leap of faith. Trust me, commit to 10 times watching a really good film. You'll start to see what I mean both about the language and the film. So those are the 5 things, okay? There they are on the screen. If you like this video, I make lots of videos about language learning, and you should go and watch another one. If you didn't like this video, I've still made lots of videos about language learning, okay? That's just how time works. I don't make the rules. So whether you approve or not, if you want to watch more videos, I put 2 of them there, or you can just click the channel name and you'll see like hundreds of videos, and you can just choose one and they're all amazing.